What's up guys, it's GM Max here, and today's video is all about how to beat the French defense. Now those who have been following on my videos may know that I actually just yesterday covered a game between So against Hare Krishna, and in that game actually we could transpose that game. But this time we're going to look at a different one, where after knight d2, obviously d4 and 94 transposed to yesterday's video, So against Hare Krishna. If you want to make sure you get access to such videos and know about them, do make sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, also, this game we're going to look at here is actually a game between Grandelius against Alexei Shirov. It's a very recent game in 2021 for the Mr. Dodgy online invitational on Chess24. And in this game, we see that Black plays a slightly unusual move in the move bishop to e7. The great thing about the Tarrasch, though, is that the Tarrasch variation with knight d2, it's a very flexible system. So it means that in, for example, it's ready to play some system like knight f3, bishop d3, c3 and castles if they play some kind of weird move against us. If they play knight to f6, this is the move that I find to be the most common one at the below the 2000 level. But it's also a move that gives white a very pleasant advantage. I think of one reason why I had such a massive score with the Tarrasch as a competitive professional player. It's because a lot of my opponents were going knight f6 and going into these positions where I was just very, very comfortable. The way I like to play it was to go c3, c5, bishop to d3, and then after knight c6, there's the interesting question of, well, how should we develop our knights? And I like to play the move knight to e2 in this position. So why not knight f3? Well, the reason is that if you play the immediate knight f3, you can still play this swap move, by the way, but it does give black the option to go cd4, and then queen b6, and it kind of becomes not so easy for us to defend that pawn from attack in a convenient way. Like knight b6, a5, a4 can be a little bit annoying, for example. So instead, I recommend to move knight e2 so that if they do play queen b6, we can simply go knight f3 and just keep our pawn very solidly defend on d4. And we can see it's very hard for black to increase the pressure on that pawn. Now, if they do play a bit more sensibly with cd4, cd4, and then f6, well, in that case, you can choose between a safe approach and a dynamic approach. The dynamic approach is to go knight f4, let them take on d4, but go for queen h5 and go for the exchange grab with e takes f6, knight takes f6, and knight g6. These lines are very sharp, and you're certainly welcome to go a lot deeper into them, but I do think that black does get enough compensation for the exchange after king f7 and pushing in the center. That's why instead I recommend the move of e takes f6. I think that this more positional approach does just give white quite a safe edge with castles, bishop d6, and knight f3. And generally in these positions, you're aiming to go bishop f4, trade off the opponent's good dark squared bishop, because we see the bishop on c8 is still stuck. And in the middle game, if we can put our knight on e5 and blockade that backward e6 pawn, white's generally going to have a very pleasant advantage. That's kind of the reason why you usually see black go queen c7 at a higher level to stop bishop f4. But our bishop can still come to g5 anyway. And then after castles, a move that works quite well is to either go bishop h4 and kind of insist on the exchange of the dark squared bishops anyway with bishop g3. Also, move rook c1 is also reasonable if you just want to put the rook opposite the queen, because that can lead to some interesting tactical opportunities laid down the track as well. But bishop h4 would be my current recommendation if pressed. Now, there is one disadvantage, I think, to playing the Tarrasch French that I should be very honest about, and that is the move of c5 at this point, which kind of shows the one disadvantage of playing knight d2 compared to knight c3, which is our knight is slightly less active on d2, and it also is true that the pawn on d4 is not so well protected. Fortunately, there are some good ways to play as white. I kind of like the shortcut of playing knight g to f3, a tricky move that would serve me very well, where after c takes d4 and knight takes d4, well, we've got a little bit of a lead in development to work with. If they go knight c6, we're going to play bishop to b5, and after bishop d7, and knight takes c6. Kind of the idea of this is if they play bishop takes c6, you can end up taking and putting the pawn on c4, and it's kind of a nice way to go queen a4 and get a bit of pressure against the black center before they complete their development. I don't think these lines do give white a very small pull. It is true that black can play b takes c6, and that's probably the way in which black should equalize. But still, you can go for ideas like castles, knight f3, e5, and c4. It's still very much a position where white can try to outplay the opponent from here. And there are other moves as well that black can play, like knight f6 is also a candidate. But then you can also play ed5, and certainly these positions after, say, knight d takes d5. And let's say bishop to c4, definitely white has his chances as well in this position. Also a move like knight to f3, just not letting black get in an e5 push and sort of freeing the bishop is also very sensible. Again, black is doing fine in this position. Of course, when we play the opening, it's worth keeping in mind that if the opponent plays all the best moves, they are going to equalize. And that's true no matter what opening we play as white. But at least in these lines, we are making black work a little bit to get that equality. If they do play a different move, let's say they play knight to c6, for example, well, then we just take, not e5, but rather the move e takes d5. And then if e takes, we can go bishop b5. And, well, the pin is kind of a little bit annoying for black. And if they do play cd4, well, we increase the pressure against that knight on c6 with the recapture. But if they play bishop d6, we can then play to move castles, and, well, we just get a very comfortable anti-isolate queen's pawn position, where our knights have a very good hold over that d4 square, and it's just a position where it's much easier to play white simply. So with that being said, let's now see what happened in the game, where Shirov played this curious bishop e7 move. And bishop e7 at first glance might seem like a very weird choice, but it makes more sense when we consider that black is keeping both c5 and knight to f3 available as options. For example, if white were to play a move like bishop d3, well, black can play c5, with it's not the point that the bishop is not really ideal on d3 in these c5 positions. After dc5, there's these complicated lines with knight f6 that I'm not going to go into, but in general, the point is that black is generally doing okay in these sort of positions. And if you play a natural move like knight gf3 instead, well, black will go knight f6. And he's not able to move order us into a knight f6 line where we're not able to play the bishop to d3 knight e2 setup that I showed you before, where you are committed to the move knight to f3. Now, to be fair, black is also committed to the move bishop e7, which also wouldn't be his first choice. But it's a line that could be a little bit annoying if you want to play the knight e2 and knight f3 setup that I recommend for white. So instead, Grandelius played the move e5. Also trying to say, well, okay, now we have an advanced French where my knight maybe isn't ideal on d2, but your bishop is in the way on e7 and is stopping black from developing the knight normally. And it's going to lead to some very interesting play, where after c5, Grandelius played the move c3, just building a strong center. And then after knight c6, he set a little bit of a trap with the move bishop to d3. And it's a move that I think actually gives white decent chance of a small edge. The point of bishop d3 is that it's actually not really a threat to take on d4. If black were to take with takes, captures, and now the capture on d4, well, what would be the move that white would play in this case? And while you're thinking about that, do make sure to smash that like button, comment below, and also you can consider subscribing as well for more of my Grandmaster Chess videos. Alright, so you decide on your move, and well done if you came up with the move queen g4. Now, you might remember the loose pieces drop off dictum, that in that case, well, the more pieces you have that are undefended, the more likely it's going to fall to some sort of tactic. And that's what we see here, because if you play knight f5, trying to defend both the pieces, white's going to capture. And after takes and queen g7, we see that the rook is not long for this world, that white just wins the house here. So since that's not available, probably black should instead play a move like bishop d7, and maybe try to get counterplay with f6, kind of like we saw in the other line. But I think in this case, after knight e2, f6 and f4, that white does still get a small pull, where you get a very nice big clamp sort of position, which shows you have seen how to play 1e4 via might remember. The knight goes to f3, we castle. And well, I like white's chances, where it's not that easy for black to damage white's center here, once the knight gets to that f3 post. Well, instead Shirov played knight to h6, but after knight h6 now the move knight e2 was played, and we kind of see that after knight f5 and knight f3, well, that the knight is not really ideally placed on f5, that the white knight's doing a very good job of defending this pawn. In fact, white could probably even play the move like knight df3 first, and that could have been one way to punish the move order, though I guess it could also transpose after knight f5, knight e2. Anyway, after knight e2, knight f5, knight f3, black played the move c takes d4, white took back with c takes d4, and it's not that easy for black to really get any pressure on the d4 pawn, because if you play a move like queen b6, the problem is that white can even play a move like castles if he wants to here, because if you try to take on d4, there's a problem that after takes, and now queen d4, that you're running into the move bishop to b5, and that discovered check just wins the game at this point. So instead, black played the move h5. h5 is kind of a bit of a weird looking move, but I guess he wants to try go g5, g4, and create some counterplay on the king side. Personally, I don't really believe in it. I think that you could just castle, and if g5, I think that the move bishop takes f5 would be a very nice transformation of the position, because that way you get rid of the knight around the king. And a nice positional move like h4 also ensure you get a very juicy h4 outpost for the knight, and that's going to be very difficult for black to deal with. Well, instead white played the move h4 at this point, with the idea of trying to sort of fix this kingside structure. But I think that's subjectively a mistake. Of course, keep in mind this is a relatively fast time control game, so this does mean that the play is not absolutely perfect, but I think that the move knight h4 would have been a safe pawn grab. Certainly after takes, white does get compensation with his rook being very active on h1 and black not finding it so easy to castle. But because the center is closed, I think that the king is relatively safe in the center anyway, and therefore black should, I think, have a reasonable game by taking the pawn and, well, asking white to show his compensation. Instead, black played queen b6, and that kind of just gives white everything that he wants. Now after bishop f5, ef5, this is basically a winning structure for white, because black is not able to get any pawn break with g5. A move like f6 doesn't really work when you're behind in development, and black is just left with these weak pawns on d5 and h5 that white can pile up on. The game continued bishop e6, and now a very nice move by Grandelius. He realized that the pressure on b2 is not as serious as it might seem at first glance, and he played a move bishop g5. Keep in mind that black's main advantage in this position is his bishop pair, so if he's able to trade off the black bishop, well, it means that white is able to just dominate on the dark squares with the knights, and just leave black kind of with holes like Swiss cheese on these squares. So if black does play a move like queen b2, well, the point is that you can then play bishop e7, knight e7, and you can even play a move like rook b1 at this point, where you let them take a2, but you can take on b7 in turn, and just have a very strong attack, because black's king is still stuck in a wide open center. Okay, it turns out they're playing like knight g5, knight f4, and going for the light squared pressure is probably even stronger, but okay, white is spoiled for choice at this point. Like, queen b2 is not a move you can really afford to play when you haven't castled your king yet. So after f6, white played a move bishop to e3, realizing that your f6 is a very weakening move, that now the knight and f4 is going to hit the bishop, which doesn't have its defender on f7 anymore. After f takes e5, d takes e5, obviously with the black king in the middle, the opening of the center is very much in white's favor. Once again, we kind of see now queen b2 is just leading to all sorts of tactical problems, like even knight f4. It's just a monster square for the knight, just hitting forks all over the place. In the game, Shirov realized he was in big trouble, and he tried to complicate with d4. But after knight e takes d4, takes. Ultimately, white is just a pawn up. Keep in mind that the bishop is under attack from the knight, which is why queen to b2 is not possible. Well, the game concluded with queen a6. White played a move queen to f3, and then after castles and queen h5, we saw that white just grabbed a second pawn, and black didn't really manage to show any compensation for it. After f4, bishop d2, rook a d8 and bishop c3, while white's managed to consolidate the position by making sure that his central pieces are very well protected. The game saw bishop e c8, trying to desperately keep that bishop pair alive before white snaps it off the board. After rook a f1, though, it's just all over for black. Well, after rook f d5, queen f3, queen c4, and now to move rook e4. Well, Shirov resigned at this point because there are all kinds of threats with the discovered attacks with the knight. Also, the pawn on f4 is right for the plucking, and black is just down too much wood here. So yeah, with this we can now see that this is how Grandelius smashed Shirov, and keep in mind that Shirov actually was a past World Championship finalist, that in 1998 he qualified for a World Championship match against Kasparov by beating Vladimir Kramnik in a match. And, well, in this game, of course, Shirov is still a very strong player even today, but Grandelius, well, he had a very strong opening idea with playing the Tarrasch with knight d2, timing that e5 move correctly, and that allowed him to get a nice spatial advantage that turned into a win in the end. So, well, that shows you how to play against the French, and shows why I've had really great results playing the Tarrasch Roche with knight d2 in my own games. I wish you best luck with playing it, and do make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with more of my Grandmaster Chess videos. So, alright, I'm going to see you guys in the next How to Beat Chess video.